So today's session is focusing on risk-driven development. It's an idea that I actually, thought of based upon a lot of my scholar practitioner research and work in the industry, and primarily focusing on the regulated industry. So risk-driven development in the regulated industry is what I'm focusing on right now. So our journey today is, first of all, unpacking what a regulated industry is, and then why risk matters in the first place to begin with, and also start thinking in terms of how to implement this concept of risk-driven development. Okay, a disclaimer here. It's not a comprehensive risk management curriculum course or whatever it is, or we are not going to be giving a detailed overview of any one industry as well. So it's only a bird's eye view of the industry or the regulated industry nature and some elements of the risk-driven thinking process that have to be incorporated. So that's our focus going to be here. First of all, what is a regulated industry? So if you want to actually put a note on your chat forum right now, that'll be great. I'm going to open up the chat just in case. What is a regulated industry? Many times people think a specific industry and take that industry as an example of a regulated industry. So pharma is a regulated industry, but while that is not incorrect, is it correct? Right. And it is absolutely correct that we have to start thinking in terms of what a regulated industry is. Any type of business that is controlled by government rules, right? The word rules and the word government is going to be too broad. And when you take a look into these considerations, it's going to be global considerations, multinational consideration, international, federal, state, and local, and many other types of refinements come into play. And so there is a lot of gray area when we come and say regulated industry, because each and every industry has its own unique nature. So let's take a few examples of what those regulated industries are. Okay. Now, if you take a look at some of the basic definitions, many times finance industry comes up, and finance has many subsectors. Banking, insurance, investment, and many of those considerations also come into play. And within each one of these industries, different regulations comes up. For instance, Sarbanes-Oxley, Graham-Leach-Bailey Act for information sharing practices, Sarbanes-Oxley for disclosure and internal controls. And there are different regulations that come into play each and every one of them. Similarly, when you take a look at the construction, we have residential construction, commercial constructions, and industrial constructions that takes into data centers and many other smart cities and stuff like that. When you take into consideration those things, you have the famous OSHA regulations, as well as the reporting of injuries, diseases, and dangerous occurrences and stuff like that. And this is called RIDDER, and it is somewhat analogous to the adverse event reporting in the medical industry as well, in the pharmaceutical industry as well. And then if we take healthcare into consideration, there is pharmaceutical space, there are medical devices, and there are other clinical practices like hospitals, hospice care, and other areas as well. Here, HIPAA considerations come into play. The famous HIPAA considerations come into play, and we also have other considerations like Sunshine Act for appropriate reporting of any gifts and things like that we are giving to the healthcare providers. And if you take into telecommunication, there are different considerations over there in some of the subsectors for equipments, services, and the wireless communication that we are all used to at this particular point. And there, basic things like CAN-SPAM Act, frequency bandwidth limitations within the telecommunication space, those things come into play. And if you take into consideration the transportation industry, then there are, aviation, maritime, rail, and coach kind of transportation. And I'm not even touching the supply chain at this point, but we still have lots of consideration in terms of Incoterms, the hazmat, which is about transportation of hazardous materials and stuff like that. And We also have education. Education is also to a large extent regulated industry. When you take a look into the early schools like chartered school, and many other schools that provide specialty education for trade and specialty students and stuff like that. And then the academic colleges, universities, all these things are governed by FERPA, ADA consideration, and many other elements as well. So each and every one of those industry has many different types of rules and regulations that govern them, right? And this is not the end. Please don't think that whatever I gave is an example of the entire list. And there is so many things that I have not even touched on. That is considerations for energy, agriculture, utilities, food services, mining, textiles, tobacco, entertainment, alcohol, firearms, defense, and government. Many elements come into play in terms of how every industry adapts the rules that are governing in that particular space. And each and every industry has specific sectors that come into play in terms of how those things will apply. For instance, in the finance space, there is anti-money laundering practices. In the education space, there is a Section 508 considerations for providing all students equal access and stuff like that. So many considerations come into play. So if every industry learns over time and leads, what would that one thing be? What is the one thing that everybody is continuously learning and leading in this space? That is primarily risk management, right? And yeah, it's very easy, Sriram, for you to say, but what's your logic behind that? And I'll tell you this, on a personal trip to Sydney, in February this year, I was observing the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I went there, looked at that Sydney Harbour Bridge. I spent quite a bit of time over there. I was seeing images of how people were working in those 1930s and 1940s time period when this Harbour Bridge was built, about going around constructing the bridge. There was no harness, there was no safety goggles, there was no protective gears, and they are dealing with all kinds of heavy equipments and stuff like that with absolutely no considerations for how they will be protected. The employees will be protected, the workers will be protected, right? And this is just one example of things that I saw over there. And another example is, they are standing on top of such a large, structure, and they have to glue in all the different steel structures, and they used what is called a big rivet. And these rivets were actually heated up at the top, and they were thrown to the other person. These people were called riveters and catchers. And those people will catch them using some kind of container, and then will pass it to somebody else who will actually solder it, screw it in. And this was a required thing. And we had 6 million such rivets that were used in the whole construction. And this, according to the tourist guy who helped me understand all these things and answered many of my questions, there are about 10,000 such rivets still in the water beneath. Okay. So considering 6 million rivets and 10,000, it's a very good number. But look at the concept here. People standing on top of such a large structure, still no harness, somebody supporting them. And you can see that right here, right? But we may actually think like, oh, this is happening in a construction space and stuff like that. But let's take a look at a different industry. Let's take a look at the pharma. A page from the annals over here. When you look at this, a long time back, several years back or several decades back, we had the drug called thalidomide, which was used for morning sickness for women, right? Pregnant women. And this is information that I gathered from reading one of the novels, Strong Medicine by Arthur Haley. And then I did additional research and stuff like that. And this information was good, but then it had some side effect. And the side effect was that, the actual babies that were born had, fissures instead of their actual arms. And this generation is just, getting past the, their lifetime at this particular point. And the effect of this is an adverse effect problem. Uncontrolled science in an unregulated market is the recipe for disaster. So it's not that, only one industry learned. It's like multiple industries learned different impacts as a result of this. And this was one of the reasons why the PDMA Act was actually started at this particular point. So if you look at this, there is a lot of information that is that every one of the industry is learning. And I'll give you some of my own anecdotal experience over here, because I also teach in universities, Northeastern University, and I also do a lot of my own management training as well. So some of the training experience and teaching experience also has taught me many things. When we take a look at the project management curriculum or the management training that we focus on, they continue to focus mainly on how do I get an employment, how do I get a promotion, or how do I get a certificate. Those are important, but that does not necessarily mean that we cannot learn from projects that have failed and apply that knowledge towards the future. For instance, I was teaching in some of the classes in Northeastern University project management areas, and I asked them, give me an example of the classic project failure that has happened. And the Big Dig in Boston, right there, is an excellent example. But little do people go look into those things, find out more information and stuff like that, right? That's that we're not telling people how to actually continuously learn, right? Now, when you took a look at some of the elements of, how do I get into the agile modes of operation or the ways of working and stuff like that, we continue to focus on how to fail fast. Agile is not about failing fast. It's also about failing forward. You don't want to learn the same lessons again and again and again, because then there is no continuous improvement. So we need to actually bring that leadership principle of what did I learn from here so that I will make appropriate changes in my processes, in my governance and stuff like that, so that I try to build a change and create the desired culture that I want. Culture is not always what we consume. It is also what we create, right? So if we are part of a toxic culture, to some extent, we are also one of the reasons behind that. So we need to be able to speak up. And that's where leadership comes into play, right? So these are some of my anecdotal experience in terms of how we are failing to learn, or sometimes even unwilling to unlearn, right? So are we learning effectively? If I had to pose that particular question here, risks continue to emerge in many different industries. For instance, let's take a look at finance industry. We all heard some of the challenges with Wells Fargo, where there were a pressure to actually increase more and more accounts being opened and stuff like that. And it's all over the news. And ethics was primarily compromised over there. Right? If you take a look at the airline industry, specifically, let's focus on Boeing. The rush to actually get some of these planes out in the air, quality was compromised. And this has been discussed in many of the papers and commercial documentaries and stuff like that. Right. And if you take a look into the healthcare, we all can relate to the Purdue Pharmaceuticals Oxycontin, which is about the opioid substance abuse. And what was the major problem over there? Yes, the mechanism of action and everything was great, but then it also created an addiction, and that was downplayed. That was downplayed because the adverse effect was downplayed in favor of the corporate profits that was required. And again, what was compromised? Ethics, proper reporting, fair balance, and all those things were properly not taken into consideration. If you take a look into some of the petroleum petroleum industry, we are very familiar with British petroleum oil spill, BP oil spill, and the challenges with the Deepwater Horizon and stuff like that. What was the major challenge from there? No formal decision-making processes. In other words, there are no governance processes within that particular oil rig that governed checks and balances, what are the agreed upon working processes and procedures. So what was compromised? Risk management, change management, all those things were compromised. Now, if we take a look into the transportation, we have seen number of different challenges, like Volkswagen being put under scrutiny because of some of the ethical compromises that they had in terms of how they were reporting some problems. Ford recalls, even Tesla has recalls. And so we are continuously seeing these kinds of challenges emerge. Why? Because time to market pressure, not enough testing, completely done. And if you take a look into the technology space, yes, we are moving more and more into cloud, but moving into cloud does not necessarily mean that everything is protected, because there are government regulations that come and say our data cannot be in a different space, different servers, different regions. And so there is still considerations for private cloud and public cloud and, hybrid cloud and multi-tenancy and, many other considerations come into play. And let's take a look at the recent, thing that everybody is talking about, artificial intelligence. There is a lot of challenges with artificial intelligence in terms of, are we doing the right thing? The concepts of the bioethical concepts of beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, autonomy, and explainable. All those things are really required. But you go and talk to any of those artificial intelligence, people or people that are working on data analytics for all these large language model, and talk to them about, tell me more about the ethical principles of related to AI. They shrug their shoulders. Right. I hope these things are making sense to you. If it is, please let me know. Use your emoticons to, let me know. So there seems to be a lot of continuous challenges that keeps coming up. And my question here is, how effectively, ethically, and efficiently are we leading? So 3 important elements: how effectively, how ethically, and how efficiently are we leading? The answer is for us to understand, but this is where my question, started moving into some of the concepts of how these elements have been shaped. Now, one of the things that I wanted to focus on is the concept of creative destruction. This is a famous concept that Joe's computer proposed several decades back, in the 1940s. And this is the time frame when we are moving into the industrialization era and stuff like that. So it was a precursor to say, there will be new kind of creations that will disrupt, the way things are being done. And that made sense in the context of the industrialization era. The focus was primarily, let's not use all the horse-driven carriages and stuff like that to transport people. Let's use the machines like buses and cars and, many other transportations to move stuff, which means, we are having one problem of not dealing with the horse manure and stuff like that. But we have a different kinds of problems. But did we actually spend enough time on what will that do for climate change? Probably not. Those are some of the challenges that we didn't think it through, right? Now, later in the last 20 plus years or 30 plus years, there is a concept of destructive creation. This is a concept advanced by Clay Christensen, and that is focusing on not replacing one industry, but some innovative ideas may actually replace many industries. And let's take an example of a simple smartphone, nothing big. Everybody has a smartphone in today's world. Let's take a look at that particular phone itself. It's not meant to replace just the telephony or the usual telephones. And, when I was having a discussion with my son a long time back about, how we used to have literally wall-hanging phones in the kitchen, he said, like, why would you ever do that? Why can't you have a cell phone? Well, this is how technology has replaced our current thinking, right? Now, that's not the only thing. The way we communicate among people at this point, we have, text messages, multimedia messages, and specific apps that are meant only for that. And then we have social groups, and so many different things are coming up at this particular point, which is how we are communicating these days, right? Our communication approach has changed. And, the use of phones, cameras in the phones have replaced some of the usual photographic approaches. Like no longer have people have those the old phones, I mean, not the phones, the cameras where we used to take pictures and have them processed. Even the digital SLR cameras are getting replaced, So the industry is reacting at this particular point. Is that all? The way we are doing shopping at this point, we no longer are looking at just at, the Black Friday. We are also looking at Cyber Monday, right? So things are changing as a result of these elements. And Rand McNally, the maps are gone. People don't look at how to, do maps at this particular point. They want to zoom in and zoom out, and all those things in today's world, which is based upon some of these apps that are actually, making it possible. And last but not the least, even thinking, the relaxation. People are opening up a mindful app, and then they are resting and meditating and relaxing and stuff like that. Well, what's the point of detoxification? Well, that's a different story. We can talk about that later. Now, if you look at these things, one simple mobile app or mobile phones is replacing so many different things. Right? That's the power of fourth industrial revolution. It also packs a lot of unknowns. Right? Now, let's take a look at what that fourth industrial revolution space actually means. It is the VUCA world, right? Now, when you take a look at this, these are all the foundational principles like interoperability, virtualization, decentralization, real-time capabilities, service orientation, modularity, and stuff like that. And I won't go into all the details here, but when I pack all these things in terms of what are the applications that are coming up, we are all familiar with all these things like robotic process automation, Internet of Things, simulation activities, cybersecurity consideration, systems integration, how different people or applications are talking among each other, cloud computing. We can spin up a computer very quick, and things like that on the cloud, the 3D technology, big data, and continuous augmented reality, virtual reality, and stuff like that. All these things are today possible. Now, if you take a look into all these risk elements that we talked about, and we take a look into all these things that are coming up, who is responsible then for risk management? Now, if you take a definition of risk, risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Now, the word uncertainty can also be viewed as the ignorance to be proactive or unwilling to listen to alternative perspectives. So, the world belongs to those that can unlearn, learn, and relearn, right? Now, if we are not going to do that, then the effect is going to be the products, services, results that we are developing are failing for our customers. We are compromising the brand equity of the company we are working for. All these things are now, emerging. So with the intergenerational mix of people working in today's remote teams, virtual teams, and stuff like that, ensuring continuity of business needs, benefit sustenance, ongoing value delivery, that is at the top of everybody's mind. Now, in that particular case, who is responsible for risk management? Now, when I ask this question, many times people come back and say, oh, it's leadership. Yes, risk management is definitely a leadership challenge. Without a doubt, it's a leadership challenge. But is leadership only to the top, like the senior management, the CEO, the senior vice president, the director, the manager? Are they the only one that are considered quote leader? Everybody is a leader, right? Everyone is a leader here. So it does not mean that, we are focusing on that. Now, I already mentioned about VUCA. Now, VUCA basically stands for the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we all know this. And we put a negative spin on this because, we don't know what we have to do. It's very complex. It's very uncertain. We can't figure it out. It's volatile. It's constantly changing. Why bother, doing anything? Because it's going to change tomorrow, just like the weather. If you don't like the weather, wait for 5 minutes, it'll change again, right? But that's not the way leaders think. The way leaders think is actually replace these concepts with yet another thing. And this is another concept somebody provided. I was not able to get a clear, person who contributed this idea, but I like that idea. So I actually use these concepts here. So VUCA involves the ability to proactively anticipate changes. Mark points, proactively. Think strategically, which means for the larger organization, not just what I have to do today. Pivot accordingly for the work that we have to do, and develop solutions very creatively and execute relentlessly. These are some of my thoughts. And according to my thoughts, I was looking for, are there any other model? And, believe me or not, the VUCA itself has been replaced by different definition. I like that. And I don't know who came up with that idea. I like that. And I basically converted this into a green model. And now if you take a look at this, volatile is replaced by vision, uncertainty is replaced by understanding, complexity is replaced by clarity, ambiguous is replaced by agility. And here we are talking not, agile, we are talking about agility, nimbleness, right? Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm calling these things out. So when you do these things, every element of the vision, the understanding, the clarity, the agility is all about leaders. And we are all equally leaders. Every team member is a leader. Every manager is a leader. Every middle manager is a leader. Every senior management is a leader. And so we need to start looking at it from that particular angle. So are we leading effectively in that case? So this is where I started, looking into some of my own experiences, and I want to share one of my experience as a vice president of a program management office. And I used to have a lot of project managers, program managers, product managers, business analysts, and reporting into me. And one of the project managers had a very interesting project charter, documented the project management plan, and everything was done, according to the book. So I asked this project manager, okay, so you have about 5 different assumptions listed here. That's wonderful. 3 different constraints. What kinds of risks do you have? And the person said, oh, we don't have any risks. How is that possible? How is that possible? Because every assumption is a risk waiting to be discovered, right? I convert every assumption into a risk, because if the assumptions prove to be wrong, it's a risk. If the constraints are not going to be honored, it's going to be a risk, right? So we need to actually convert all these things. Now, how are we leading people to identify risks and convert assumptions into risks? We're not seeing this. Again, I was in Sydney, and I was in Bondi Beach, and I saw this little clip, a mural that somebody has done. I don't know who that is. I'll give the appropriate credit to whoever did this, but I really like this. No risk, no story. If there is no risk that you are identifying, there is no story to tell. If there is no story to tell, there is no reason why you have to develop a product, a service, a result, or whatever it is. There is no risk, there is no story, right? So if you take a look at some of the things that people are constantly looking at, I won't go into the details here. And this is a chart that I created myself based upon how people are continuing in their career, like being an individual person to a team to an enterprise level, and then being technical to project orientation to program orientation and to portfolio orientation. I put some of those things that people are constantly coming up with and put them into this thing. So I won't go into each and every one of those definitions, but if you take a look at some of the patterns here, every element over here is loaded with risk. There is not a single thing that here I have identified as a risk itself, because each and every one of them is a risk over here. If I don't factor user experience at the early stages, that's a risk. If I don't have proper coding standards, that's a risk. If I don't have proper security protocols, processes in place, that's a risk. Cloud has a risk. Prescriptive analysis that we are doing in the data analysis things, that has a risk. And so each and every one of them is loaded with risk. But how effectively are we talking about risk in each and every one of those elements? If you take a look at the project, program, portfolio management, one of the things that is constantly moving across the whole continuous spectrum is risk management, right? So being proactive about risks is something that we need to become more conscious about, right? When we take a look into this, we focus on value. When we focus on value, we are focusing on the product increments or iterative features that we are releasing. And then we are looking at the product, service, or result. This is the basic, simple definition of project management or the ways of working in agile, regardless of whatever framework that you choose, right? Now, if you take a look into this, it is much more than a simple idea of what a project is. yes, it is a temporary endeavor to deliver unique product, service, or result, but it is a little bit more, because what we are doing has to become operational and become beneficial. Only then value comes. So everything that we are creating is through the benefits, through the capabilities, through the integrated output. So quality is going to be a continuous element that needs to flow. If one of us do not do a good job, the outcome is going to be a bad one. And if that product is going to be integrated in something else, that's going to be a bad one as well, right? So we are continuously, this is the reason why we do build versus buy, or rent versus lease, and all these kinds of things, right? So when you take a look into these things, there is a business, there is a technology, there are regulations, there are compliance, and there are external and internal considerations that are coming up. So in project management, we talk them as organizational processes, or enterprise environmental factors. Right? So we need to become aware of this. And if you take a look at this, my thought process here is value, therefore, is a function of quality. Quality is a function of risk. Therefore, value by implicit function is dependent upon risk, right? From this angle, I started looking into what can we do next, right? So first, if you see it, say it, that's definition of risk, but that's not the only definition of risk. I also said, like, if you feel it, express it, because sometimes it may be touchy, mushy feeling, like, should we do this right? Yeah, we are doing artificial intelligence way to, create a new product, but what is the impact if we do something incorrect? What's the impact of that? That non-maleficence have to come into play. How much autonomy we are giving to the end users, even if we choose to say, you are not who you say you are. Right? That needs to be some of those elements as well. So we need to move away from one of the basic problems in the world right now, which is risk is frequently associated with a bad connotation. Don't tell anything that is risky because I don't want to like it. But that's not true. Right? Emerging from the basics of the SWOT analysis, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat, there is both an opportunity component and there is a threat component. There is something with that strength, there is something with a weakness. So if you take those considerations and look into what I call as the 5P principle, like the project, program, portfolio, product, and process management, risk is associated with both opportunities and threat, with both positive things as well as negative things. So we need to move away from the thinking that risk is a bad word. It's not always bad, right? Now, in my book on organized common sense, I basically say this: if you don't manage risk, risk will manage you. The later will not be a good one for you. So the more proactive we are in managing, the better. So this is where I led into the risk-driven development, an idea that I generated from my scholar practitioner experience. And the steps are very simple. Understand the risk management lifecycle, focus beyond what education teaches you, right? Evaluate the industry and company specific risks to your work, which means product, services, research and stuff like that, and perform a gap analysis with the analysis of, with the RDD architecture, which the risk-driven architecture, and prioritize accordingly. And then start also understanding the frameworks, the standards and regulation, which feeds back into the risk management lifecycle again. So it's more of a cycle. So what are some of the stages of the risk management? I'm not going to go into the full details. Most of you are very familiar with this. How you plan for the risk and how do you identify the risk and how do you do a qualitative or quantitative analysis. And there are different techniques for each and every one of them. And then how do you come up with risk responses, and how do you implement them, and how do you monitor them? And, different elements exist over there. And I won't go into all the details over here. Now, some of the artifacts that we are creating are risk management plan, risk register, urgency list, prompt list, and updated risk register. What is our risk response plan? What are the change requests, and how we are continuously monitoring these things? And again, these things, if I continue to discuss, it will be a longer discussion. So if we apply this logic into the agile ways of working, we have the risk adjusted product backlog, and then risk accommodated product iteration or sprint backlog, and then risk review in the iteration planning, and risk monitoring during the whole iteration. That is the idea behind the product backlog actually being called risk adjusted prioritized product backlog. Now, classical education, whether we are going to a school or whether we are going into a training, talks about, hey, let's do a documentation review, let's do the checklist analysis, assumptions or what-if analysis, diagrammatic techniques like histogram, root cause analysis, Pareto charts, and many other things, information gathering techniques like brainstorming, Delphi techniques, nominal group techniques, so many other ways, JAT sessions and stuff like that. So we can go into all those things later, but this is what normally people go through, right? But there is a little bit more than what we can look at. And I feel that, we have to start factoring innovation consideration into this. What are some of the strategy consideration? Strategy is about competitive advantage, doing all these things. So what, right? And how can we sustain them in the longer run? Just because we are able to put something and put it to somebody else does not necessarily mean that, it will continue to work, right? Communication considerations, how we are working with multiple team members, not just, the 3 or 4 team members working together, but how we are able to work with different stakeholders, manage up, manage down, manage sideways, manage internally, manage externally. And the systems thinking approach, like, why am I doing this? What am I giving up to do this? What are the benefits of doing this? What are the challenges of doing this? How am I going to know that I have arrived, right? And then leading teams. All these things are, I didn't say managing teams, I talked about leading teams. So these are all important elements. And the one thing, in my humble opinion, that connects all these things is for us to think different. And thinking different is all about leadership, how we lead, right? So let's take a look at this and see how we can make it happen, right? So identify risks from a quality lens perspective. I said, like, quality is a function of risk. So if you look at it from a quality perspective, there is this famous cost of quality consideration, which is cost of good quality or conformance, and cost of bad quality or cost of non-conformance. And we have how do you build quality? How do you assess quality? How do you identify internal failures? And how do you deal with external failures? And there are different elements there. Now, think about all the potential risks that you can come up with for your product, your service, your result within your company, within your industry. So it could be business risk, technical risk, scope risk, schedule risk, market risk, stakeholder risk, communication risk, resource risk, budget risk. I won't go into the details here, but you see everything that I have listed over there. And then there are some foundational things like security risk, compliance risk. How do you continuously monitor the risk? What are some of the infrastructural risks, the environmental risks, and the benefit realization risk? These are all different types of risk that can come into play. So we need our team members to be taught, to be led in terms of all these risks and how they identify them in their work product, in their company's ways of working. If not, things are not coming together, right? When they do that, they are ready to move to the next slide, which is going to be about how I identify the gaps. Now, you take all these different risks that we have identified, and then come and say, how will this risk manifest in my product, service, or result, impacting the benefit and impacting the value? As a result of that, you categorize the risk, subcategorize the risks over there, assess them, prioritize them, and appropriate controls put in place, and you track them and see whether those were, the work that you have done is actually mitigating or reducing the risk liability and stuff like that. And what are you in that case accepting and stuff like that. So this is the whole cycle, right? So this is where you are looking at it from a gap standpoint, applying those things and say, how will this manifest? What are the things that I can do? And everybody wants this risk management as a result. It's not like, somebody is going to think about all the risks and, come up with all the challenges. In fact, one of the biggest problems with most of the project managers and program managers is that they think they are wearing the super cape. Then they can manage all the risks. No, they're not. They're not subject matter experts in every potential domain, but they need to be able to manage the interactions among different domains, and they're accountable. They're not responsible. So, something to keep in mind. Now, I also took examples of 2 risks alone, right? Just 2 risks, business risk and technical risk. Many people can relate to this, and all the other things, many people cannot. But assuming that business risk and technical risk are the only 2 risks that I'm going to focus on, I can come back and say, what are some of the user requirements? And those user requirements are implemented by functional specifications, how we are going to implement them. And those things are going to have some kinds of a design documentation. So this could be business requirements document, use cases, and the functional specifications could be features, user stories, and the design considerations could be high-level design documents, UML diagrams, and many other things. So I'm just giving you a few examples here. Now, if you take a look at the business risk can impact user response in many ways. There's a one-to-many relationship there. And the same way, technical risk can actually impact the business risk as well. Anything changes in the technology that could impact the business. This is the reason why new ideas are coming up. AWS is an idea from a couple of engineers, not necessarily from the top management, right? So now functional specifications and design specifications may have some technical considerations that, I can do this primarily because of the regulations around where the data can be stored, right? So things like that. And then observation, in lean thinking, in agile and project management, we talk about this, like the observations, which are Jamba Jambuchi walks. And, those things will actually provide ideas like, yeah, we have the protective head gears, but people are not wearing them. Why? Because the elastic strip is actually, creating some allergic reactions. As a result, they're not using it. Well, now you have to replace that with appropriate things. So these are observations. How is my product actually being used? How is my policies and procedures being adopted or not adopted, and stuff like that. Similarly, the test scenarios, exploratory testing, risk-based testing, acceptance test-driven development testing, behavior-driven development testing, hypothesis-driven development, all these things exist, but we're not thinking into them. So the test scenarios have to be thought much more from everybody's standpoint, and not necessarily this is going to be a tester. Somehow we are not going to add quality to the end product, which is already bad to begin with. Right? So we need to start thinking in terms of this. So I just use a couple of examples like business risk and technical risk and put into our product sequences and say how this can impact. Now, take a look at this, put it back into your organization, into your industry, and all the different things will start coming up. Then, this may be expanded into, a very complicated, railroad, map of how different trains are coming from different red line, blue line, green line, and stuff like that. It could become very complicated by looking at all the potential risks, and then you move forward. Well, as soon as you start looking at all the potential risks and everything else, you also have to start thinking in terms of, okay, how do I prioritize, right? So when you take a look at this, if you take value on the x-axis and put risk on the y-axis, obviously we are getting into what are the high value, high risk thing that we really have to do first, handle them first. And this is coming directly from President Eisenhower's metrics. It's not new. Somebody outside of our risk management or outside of software development, change management processes, projected this idea. Do first, high value and high risk things needs to be addressed next. And the next one is going to be high value, but low risk domains. Let's focus on that next. The next one is, this is the one that I'm going to do last. I'm not ignoring them. I need to do them, the low value, low risk. But then things that I have to literally avoid are the, high risk and low value, because it doesn't give you any return on investment, right? Now, when you take a look into this and replace the value and risk, prioritize for risk value here. If you replace these things, the probability comes and the impact comes. This is what the regular PI grid and things like that focus on. Now you can prioritize with the risk heat map, the same logic. I don't think Project Management Book of Knowledge gave credit to President Eisenhower on this, but I do want to call this out, right? So when you take a look into this and apply the thought process behind leadership, let's take an example of the blue ocean leadership. Now, in blue ocean leadership, we come back and say, how do we eliminate things that do not add value? How do we raise awareness? How do we create some workspaces for innovation? How do you reduce things that are not necessarily adding value? So concepts of blue ocean leadership still applies over here in the same risk-based prioritization. And if you extend this to the Boston Consulting Group analogy of cash cows and dogs and question marks and stars and stuff like that, you can see the similar logic emerge as well. So from a strategy, from a leadership, all these things come into play. So they're all connected to risk. So we need to be the agents of change, specifically for the culture where risk management is thought through, right? So we need to lead in that creation. Now, we need to talk about walking the talk on this continuous improvements, because that's a Kaizen mindset and stuff like that. Now, if you take a look at the examples of the frameworks that are available, there are many, many frameworks. So for instance, if you take a look at the industries, there is failure mode effects analysis, FMEA. There is fault tree analysis, FTA. There is general automation manufacturing protocol, which is GAMP. On the medical side of the industry, some on the manufacturing side of the industry, and then the hazard analysis and operational analysis, which applies in hazardous transportation, as well as in the restaurant areas. There is also Basel and solvency for financial firms, some on the bank side, some on the investment side. And the control objectives for information technology, which is COBIT. And there are so many different things, right? Now, if you take a look at this whole thing, you can take a look at it from a guidelines. What are some of the guidelines, like general manufacturing protocol, general clinical practices, stuff like that. So they are called GXP. And then you can look at Six Sigma about total quality management. And there is also emergence of computer system validation and computer system assurance, guidelines that are coming up. Now, these things can be one way of looking at this. Now, another way of looking at this is from a regulations that are binding in your particular industry, which could be examples of the Sarbanes-Oxley I talked about, the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulations for privacy, HIPAA we talked about for healthcare, and the DO 178C for the aviation space. So there are specific regulations that bind in different industries. Now, if you take a look at this from a vendor neutral international standards, then ISO comes into play. 31,000 is about risk management. 14971 is risk management specifically within the medical industry. 26262 is risk management within the automation space, like, which incorporates ASPICE and other guidelines. Now, on the other side, there are organizations that focus on advising different regulatory bodies, governments, and, putting together their own thought process, which is NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and then the ISACA for security guidelines. So there are different industries that are coming up. And different regulations that are emerging, different guidelines and different standards and stuff like that. So in your particular industry, what standards apply? How much do you know those standards? In what way you are leading the teams, your companies, your business processes in this particular process? And this is when technology acceleration, global standards, coaching considerations, and leadership challenges are emerging as how we actually contribute to these processes. So use frameworks for risk analysis. These things are guidelines. They're not going to be, if I follow this, I'm going to be picture perfect. These are guidelines for you to help you with my previous slide about cost of quality and how different risks specific to my industry will apply. And there are frameworks that we talk about, like, the VUCA world, which is the PESLI, the political, environmental, societal, technical, legal, ethical, economical, and demographic consideration. And then there are TCOM, which is technical, environmental, commercial, operational, and political considerations. And there is also the, the VRIO for internal assessments, which is, valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized for us. And I even go one more step. And, if you can't think of all these things, at least at a minimum at your team project level, think about technical feasibility. Can we do it? And operational feasibility, well, just because we did it, can we sustain it? And environmental feasibility, look at it from an environment, not from your project budget. What are all the internal, external failures that will come? And from those aspects, can I afford it? I call this a TOE principle. technical, operational, and environmental feasibility. So if you factor in all these considerations, you are actually, taking a look into the risk as the epicenter, and from there you are developing the thoughts. So in my humble opinion, technology is sandwiched between leadership and risk management thought processes. If you remove the leadership or the risk management thought processes and just focus only on technology, we will continue to see the failures that have repeated. In that case, we are not failing forward at all, right? So some of my guidelines or risk is about the perception versus the reality. But more and more today we are seeing this. So lead the cultural change in your organization. Culture is not necessarily what you consume, but also what you create. So incorporate continuous learning mindset in you. Don't look for on-the-job training, company-sponsored training. Take it on you, because your learning is your responsibility, not somebody else's responsibility. Right? Understands more about the standards and frameworks. No academic institution, no training is going to focus on all these wonderful things. Most of the things that I'm talking about are all, personal, my own, learning endeavor. Right? So you need to focus on those things, and then incorporate that thought process in your product development journey, which includes project management, program management, portfolio management, change management, all those elements that you are looking into. Learn more about the organizational leadership, how you lead organizations. Because it's not, leadership is not principles alone. It's more about practices. So you need to understand how to practice leadership. So if you are able to do those things, you are on the path to risk-driven development thought process. I hope this session was really helpful to you. And I've written a lot of these things at this particular point. So I would basically, suggest one thing. You can definitely reach out to me. I have my email address listed here. You can definitely reach out to me and provide me thoughts. With that being said, I wish you all good luck, and let's use risk-driven development thought processes.